Meet a pioneer in local online news next on Carpe Diem. Hello, I'm Mark Rosenwig, Assistant Professor of Television and Digital Media at Montclair State University. The Internet has fueled a tremendous growth of online news sources. Joining me is a key architect in the development of local news online. Debbie Galant is the director of the New Jersey News Commons based on the Montclair State campus. She's founder of BaristaNet.com, one of the first websites to use the blog format to cover local news. She's also been a reporter for the New York Times. Has written for other publications, including New York Magazine and New Jersey Monthly. Debbie, welcome to Carpe Diem, and most importantly, welcome to Montclair State. It's great to have you as part of our team here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're going to get into what you're doing here in just a minute in detail, but first, how did you get the journalistic bug? How did it all get started for you?
Well, actually, my dad is a journalist. Actually, he's retired now, but he was a journalist, and he was an entrepreneurial journalist in Washington, D.C., covering food safety. So I grew up in a journalism household, and then when I was in college at University of Virginia, I was on the Cavalier Daily, which is a daily newspaper. And I grew up in the Woodward and Bernstein era. So those of us who are that age who were interested in journalism, it was just a really gung-ho time to be learning to be a journalist.
And you mentioned his entrepreneurial spirit. How did that translate to you?
Well, you know, eventually, when I got ready to start Barista Net, or when I got the idea to start Barista Net in 2004, it was really at the beginning of things changing in the economics of the news business. And for me, what had happened was I had been writing a column for the New York Times Jersey section. They had given the column to somebody else. I was still writing for the section. And my husband gave me the URL, DeborahGalant.com, so I could start blogging. Anyway, one thing led to another. I got some ideas. I heard from the real pioneer, Jeff Jarvis, about the idea of hyperlocal blogging, and I put it all together, and I thought, wow, I actually have publishing blood in me. I have a role model for this. And it just suddenly clicked that was part of the experience I'd grown up with as well.
So what is Barista Net exactly, for those who haven't seen it yet? How does it work? How does it disseminate news and so on? Well,
Barista Net is a local online news site. And it's basically sort of like the community newspaper that everybody's familiar with, that often in New Jersey lands in your mailbox on a Thursday. But our innovation was that it wasn't going to be in print, it wasn't going to be once a week, it was going to be every day and all the time. And of course now, in 2012, everybody is used to the idea of the internet being where you get your news. But back in 2004, it was very hard to explain to people. They just didn't get it. And the name, everybody asks, like, why is it called Barista Net? Mm-hmm. It's sort of the play on the barista, the Starbucks barista, the idea that it's a virtual coffee shop. In the old days, you went to a bar and you talked to your bartender. These days, you go to a coffee shop with your laptop and you talk to your barista. And it was originally called the Barista of Bloomfield Avenue, even though the URL was always baristanet.com.
And how does the news that you disseminated on that website and you continue to, mm-hmm. how does that differ in focus? You mentioned the local aspect, certainly.
Right.
But how, is it probing content? Is it news you can use? How would you describe it? And how do you carve out your niche today?
Well, first of all, it's more interactive. Now the competitor that we always had at BaristaNet, which is in Montclair, was the Montclair Times. And now, the Montclair Times always had a website from the very beginning, but back then it was mostly archival. They certainly weren't breaking news on it. They wanted to sell their newspapers. They didn't want to give it away for free. Now they are. But because, and they also now have comments, but their commenting and their commentariat is kind of mild compared to BaristaNet's. And that's because when we started, so what we started to do was, one, breaking news, things in real time. 2, the idea that it was a conversation because comments are very important there. And 3, there was an informality and sort of a cheekiness about the whole thing. Sort of, you know, Gawker meet your local news, or the, you know, the New York Magazine's front of the book, meet your local news. So that was something that hadn't really been used, a voice that really hadn't been used in local news. And I figured in New Jersey, in Montclair, where you have a really sophisticated news audience, they were used to that kind of sophisticated voice. And they weren't always looking for that very straightforward, somewhat boring you know, coverage of the news that I had always seen, you know, in the local newspapers.
Now, you were one of the first, and then that spawned other competitors too, including AOL's Patch, which has, what, about 85 local sites around the state of New Jersey.
Right.
What is that competition like, and what are they doing different from Barista Net, and how does it all play out at this point?
Well, you know, Patch did study us. You know, it's well known, and I've talked to executives at Patch, so we were very much in their sights as a model for what they were doing. We're not a big part of Tim Armstrong's story of how he started it, but
the head of AOL.
The head of AOL.
Right,
now
right,
the head of AOL,
right,
but he was the head. AOL bought Patch,
right,
and then made him the head of AOL. Anyway, what was I going to say? So how does it? So they definitely had us in mind. One of the ways I kind of look at it is, it's very similar. The only difference, it's a corporate, and because it's corporate, it is more, you know, homogenous. So it's sort of the Applebee's of local news. It's doing the same thing, and the quality really depends on the reporter, the editor who's in charge of each patch, and some of them are quite good. But they all look alike because that's corporate America, in the same way that McDonald's and Applebee's and Walmart's all look alike. And yeah, the local indie websites and hyperlocal sites, of which there are, you know, 20 or 30 in the state, are very sensitive about Patch in the same way that Main Street is sensitive about Walmart. So there is a little guy versus big guy kind of thing that's going on. But I must say that, you know, there really is a lot of good work being done by Patch.
Are these viable businesses? Are they making money? Are they here to stay?
Well, that's a good question, because Patch isn't yet making money. Tim Armstrong, as we mentioned, it just recently announced that that they are going to be making money in a year, but they haven't yet.
But that doesn't make up for all the money they lost.
They've been losing
the last few years.
They've been losing.
I like it when corporate people, it's like Oprah's network. They said, "Oh, she's going to, you know, third quarter or, you know, next year sometimes making money," but that means quarterly.
They've been losing $150
in the black doesn't make up for the
Yeah, they've been
losses,
losing $150
right?
million a year. It's been a big, you know, and shareholders have gotten exhausted.
Right.
At the indie level, Barista Net is, you know, in addition to being a pioneer, is also known as one of the sites that has made money. But that said, it hasn't made anybody, including myself, rich. But, you know, by the standards of this industry, by the local news industry, you know, we have done pretty well, and, you know, well enough to, you know, hire reporters and have money, have a payroll and have a budget.
So it'll be here for a while.
I think Barista Net will be here for a while.
Good. Tell us about your new venture here at Montclair State, and also I know the Dodge Foundation is involved and others, and that's called NJ News Commons, New Jersey News Commons. How did that all come about? What's it all about? What should our viewers know so they can sample it too, right?
Well, this all started a couple of years ago when the state was deciding to, when Christie was deciding to get rid of the NJN, the New Jersey News public television station. Right. And so there had been a lot of discussions about the future of journalism in New Jersey. And at the same time, the same systemic economic problems that were hitting all of journalism, the layoffs in newsrooms, were hitting companies like the Star-Ledger, which had been, you know, one of the most prominent newspapers really in the country, and its newsroom was about half of what it had been. So solutions were being sought for what could help. And the Dodge Foundation and Chris Daggett really took a proactive interest in this. And I was invited to a meeting along with a lot of other news leaders 2 years ago about what was going to happen. And during that meeting, I just sort of popped up with the idea of a news cooperative for the state that would be sort of modeled on the AP, but would drill down to the smaller partners like Barista Net. I threw that idea out. Jeff Jarvis and Chris Daggett actually loved the idea and proposed it as a Knight grant.
I think we should also mention that Jeff Jarvis is one of the key, the assistant director at CUNY's Graduate School of Journalism.
Exactly.
And is with EW.com. And
yes,
so on.
yes.
Yeah.
And he was the one who gave me the idea for Barista Net initially. So anyway, they took the idea and ran with it, and then Montclair State got involved with it, and I was still running Barista Net. But people began to tell me that this was, beginning to happen. Mm-hmm. So I sort of put my hat into the ring and said, well, I would love this. I've been getting more meta in the news business, getting more into the whole idea of what is the news business, as opposed to, when you run a hyper-local news site, you're reuniting dogs and cats and their owners day to day, and you can get tired of that after 8 years. Anyway, I thought this would be a really fun challenge, and so I was hired to do this. So what is it doing? What is it all about?
Right.
We have a number of missions. First of all, we're nonprofit, and we're not in the business to compete against any of the news sites that we serve. So while there is sort of some AP kind of thing going on in that we're a cooperative, we are not a business like the AP, and we're not, producing anything really in the way of original content, except for these sort of daily newsletters that I do. What we're trying to do is to get news organizations in New Jersey to cooperate with each other and share content. We're trying to start some collaborative projects that will bring together staffs of different news organizations. We're trying to do training, and I've already launched this series of Google Chats called Learning Lunches, where I talk to a number of different news organizations on what is like internet TV.
Is that open to the public?
Those broadcast live on YouTube, and when we have them, and they're on Tuesdays, 12:30 p.m. And
so they would look for New Jersey News Commons?
I tweeted out, for now, it will be on our website when we have a website. Okay. For now, the best way to say it is to look for the tweets at njnewscommons.com. At njnewscommons on Tuesdays. Okay. And then about an hour before, I tweet out what the URL is going to be.
Great.
So you can watch them live, and they also can be watched afterwards archivally. So last week, I talked to cop reporters about the cop beat, and I have other things planned on, various subjects, ranging from social media to, different things, peer-to-peer kind of training.
Now, tell us about the wide range of sites that are involved in this, right? I mean, you were telling me about, for example, was it the Weather Chaser or something like that?
Yeah.
Tell us about some of these people.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really fabulous about this is just learning all the different people who are doing this. Obviously, I knew about a lot of the hyper-local sites, and I certainly knew about the bigger players. But my first 2 months were really to gather and find out who the news gatherers were. So there's this guy named Justin Osceola, and he's down the shore, and he runs something, it's a Facebook page called Jersey Shore Hurricane News. This started last year before Hurricane Irene. He heard a lot of rumors about how bad the hurricane was going to be for the Jersey Shore, so he threw it up on Facebook about 2 days before the storm hit, had 1,500 followers the next day. Now he's up to 65,000 followers, and they form a sort of crowdsourcing network on anything having to do with weather, traffic, any kind of 911 call, any kind of emergency in the state. So it started with the hurricane, it went to the October snowstorm and the relief efforts, but then he had built such a powerful engine of crowdsourcing that he just kept it, and he kept the name. He doesn't really make any money on this. He's trying to support it with t-shirt sales. So you can actually, and I bought a t-shirt that says, I'm a source at...
How much?
Oh, I think it was $15, maybe $20. But I wear it proudly to the gym, and but it's very, very cool. And so I was in Chicago for a business trip this fall, and there was a helicopter crash in Princeton, And I was sitting next to one of my friends who runs a hyperlocal site called Planet Princeton, and I saw a tweet about it, and I said, "This is your territory, right?" And she said, "Yeah, oh my God," and she's trying to report it from Chicago. And 5 minutes later, I get an email from Justin, and he's totally on it. He's got about 20, 30 comments already and pictures from the scene. So he has so many people, between 65,000 people, somebody is there whenever anything happens, and they send it right in, and they post it right on the page.
How important is it to be first with these stories when you're running a hyperlocal site? And sometimes do people rush to be first and rather than be right? And how much of a concern is that with all this flow of information right now?
Well, that's a good question. When I first started Barista Net, being first was critical. But now with all the social media, it's hard for anybody to be first. So being first is really not that much of an advantage. It can't really be your stock and trade anymore, because you're going to be beat by somebody with an iPhone anywhere. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about it, in terms of really the sort of deep thoughts about journalism, one of our members is John Mooney and the NJ Spotlight, not just John, but his whole organization, Likio, as well. And I was talking to John one day very early on, and I said, "Do you ever break news in the middle of the day?" And he said no. And I said, like a big vote happened in the legislature, and he said no. He goes, "I want at least an hour to think about it. I'd like to actually be able to reflect." And I said, there should be something called the slow news movement, in the same way that we have the slow food movement, where people are actually back to putting ingredients together and cooking things. And what do you know, there actually is something called a slow news movement, and that may be one of my learning lunches or a seminar, because that's.
I'd love to participate in that.
Yeah,
And
I think
actually,
it's
because I've done a lot of study of sports media and sports media ethics, or lack of, and when we have our panels at the Barra Museum here on campus, almost every sports journalist that comes through there says that there's this pressure to be first, especially the ones that work for the so-called major ones, the Daily News, the Times, the NBC, stuff like that, and they're questioning it now. They really are, because they've had to fight off editors and say, I want to be right, we may have to wait another 10 minutes, and by the way, who's going to really know? They will know if we're wrong. If we're right, they're probably not going to know that somebody else had it 10 minutes ago.
It's absolutely true. The news consumer doesn't care. That mentality, and it is very deep in all of us who are journalists, of wanting to be first. Right. It's just part of our DNA. But it really comes out of an era where people chose their news source and they stuck with it. So they chose CBS News because that was the most trusted name in television news, or they chose the Washington Post or the New York Times. These days, people get their news from their mobile devices, which means they're getting multiple news on multiple channels. And they really, unless you're a jockey and you're into the whole business of inside journalism, you're not paying attention to it. You don't care who told you first that Sandusky got a sentence. People don't care. Well,
even in that story, the fact that the 24-year-old reporter, Sarah Ganem from the Harrisburg paper, broke it, but she continued to be in the forefront. So it became appointment reporting for people. In other words, not just saying, oh, I made it first, now I'm on to the next thing. It's, is there enough in-depth reporting today, or have these financial cutbacks in the media industry limited that, and how much of a concern is that for you?
Well, in-depth reporting is expensive, and so it has certainly been on the cutting board. And one of the problems in journalism is that it used to be, in broadcasting, a very lucrative business, and it no longer is. Its margins are very thin. It is a concern. One of the things and that's one of the reasons why you have people like Chris Daggett and foundations really across the United States really funding new initiatives. So, for example, NJ Spotlight, which I mentioned, was started by some ex-Star Ledger reporters who I think took their buyouts, but saw the handwriting on the wall in terms of the economics there, and decided that what was important, and they made a decision. They could have gotten into hyperlocal news like I was, which was a big hot thing, but they felt like what was more important was what was going on in Trenton, which is where a lot of the cuts have been, and what was going on in reporting on issues like education and in the environment and the economy. So NJ Spotlight was founded with a Knight grant to really do that kind of long form investigative kind of reporting, and it's something that we also are hoping at the NJ News Commons to be helpful with in terms of nurturing and possibly helping some of our partners prepare ideas to send to the Dodge and the Knight Foundations for funding on special projects.
So what's your long-term vision for the Commons at this point, the 3 to 5 year vision? Where are you going to be at that point, do you
wow,
think?
I feel like I'm in a job interview.
No. I think our viewers are interested in how it's going to progress, at least on the drawing board.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I've been really thinking about building it. I mean, I've been building it from scratch, and our funding is really only guaranteed for 2 or 3 years. But it's a good question, and I think that the question, it's forcing me to think a little bit beyond. I mean, I would like to see more entrepreneurs encouraged to start new news sites or new news efforts, and I don't think they have to be strictly local. I think they can be creative. So, for example, I'm dying to have somebody take Newark Airport as a subject and do a hyperlocal site about
that would be fascinating,
right?
Yeah,
You've got so many people. Yeah. It's like a little city unto itself. Or an issue. You could really throw up a blog just about the gubernatorial race next year. You could just, do, and especially if it's Booker, So there's
that would be fun. Booker Christie. That would be exciting. Almost as good as Romney Obama.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So I mean, what I would like to do, and then one of the things that I don't know if I mentioned when I was giving the overview was to really help strengthen some of these entrepreneurial sites and to help them. So I had the editor of or the publisher of Glocally Newark, which is a Newark-based site, in my office yesterday, kind of telling me, expounding on his ideas, and he really had recently been to the same conference I was in Chicago, and he had been totally stimulated. He was telling me all these ideas he had, and I was like, well, what do you want me to do? How can I help you? And he really wanted feedback. He really wanted me to say which of the ideas he liked, and where should he go next. And so I will want to do that in informal ways and in formal ways, to have some seminars where really I'm helping these entrepreneurs learn how to do things like sell ads and develop a business plan and and adapt to mobile, because that's going to be one of the huge challenges.
That's a tremendous value. I mean, because you're offering the whole deal from your expertise.
Right.
That you have to have. You may not become super wealthy, but you still have to have a business plan. It can't just be ad hoc and so on. And I think a lot of people who want to start their own blog or their own niche site don't think about those things.
Right, right. And I've been lucky enough to benefit from some training that the Patterson Institute paid for last year in association with RJI, the Reynolds Journalism Institute. That was basically, it was like a big boot camp for 12 hyperlocal sites, some nonprofit, some profit, to really teach us how to do more planning. And so these are efforts that I've been benefited from and want to see if I can also bring to this ecosystem.
What's your view of the future of journalism overall? I mean, are these newspapers going to vanish or partially vanish? We have a number already that are publishing print editions 3 or 4 times a week. They won't give up the Sunday edition because there's too much advertising in it. Where are we headed with all of this, do you think?
Well, it's actually a very exciting time. I mean, it's a sad time for certain things. Newsweek recently announced that it was no longer going to have a print edition. The newspapers, in terms of the word paper, are on their way out, and unfortunately the readership of things that are printed on paper is an older demographic. But at the same time, there's a lot of excitement and creativity and innovation going on. So the question is it, it's news. It's how is news delivered? It doesn't necessarily have to be a paper, and it doesn't have to be a subscription. So I went recently to San Francisco to the Online News Association, and one of the sessions I attended was John Keefe, who's the data guru for WNYC, which is one of our partners, on how to use fusion tables to create a data map.
Whoa.
Yeah, does that sound like great?
What the heck is that?
So you've probably seen this some places.
Yeah, what is it in layman's terms?
Okay, in layman's terms. Okay, so you've probably seen in some websites, and New York Times does a great job on it, and NYC does a great job on it, and NJ Spotlight does it as well, where you see these maps, and it could be I don't know, crime in the state of New Jersey, or any kind of data point, any kind of, and it's mapped, and it can be done in really elegant, interesting ways and interactive ways, and this is really one of the new frontiers. And what I have discovered is that a lot of journalists these days want to learn how to become coders, in other words, programmers. They really want to learn what's there. And in fact, if I can put in a plug for something that we're planning, which is a hackathon. And a hackathon is something that the coder community, people think of hacker as a bad term, like people hack into the government. But hacker is actually, within programmer, is a good term. It means just anybody who knows how to code. And these hackathons were created so that they could get a challenge, and over the course of a Saturday or a weekend, produce actual apps and things having to do with. So
you'll let us know when that's happening?
Yeah, we'll let you know when that's happening.
Okay.
And we want to, in this case, have journalists and coders working side by side, and to really work on information needs.
That'll be interesting. One other question I have for you. We're here on the campus where we work with students. You're starting to meet some of our students. We have some terrific ones. How should our students be preparing themselves for media careers right now?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, first of all,
we have 30 seconds to answer.
Oh, okay. Well, they should be trying to get internships. They should be learning everything they can about every technology, and they should
all
be
the
platforms. They should be reading widely on the future of news, and there are lots of places that aggregate those things.
And the writing, we can't forget the writing, correct?
We can't forget the writing. Writing, good, clear writing is storytelling.
And do you find this environment invigorating here, being around all the students and everything?
It's great. Just on my way in, somebody was telling me about some tape that they had done in an interview they'd snagged, and I'm really impressed so far with the students that I've met.
Great. Well, come back and see us soon, and we'll see you on campus. And the Commons is a great project. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all of you for joining us as well. For more information on this or any edition of Carpe Diem, write us at carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. I'm Mark Rosenwig. For all of us at Montclair State University, thanks for watching Carpe Diem.